professional wrestler crossed the line, literally, and body slammed a royal guard in broad daylight. It was meant to be a prank, but it turned into something much, much more serious. It was a bright, crisp morning in London. Outside Buckingham Palace, the usual crowd gathered. Grandparents with grandkids, couples on vacation, and veterans standing silently with hands behind their backs. All eyes were on the red-coated guards, still as statues. Among them stood Edward Clarke, 30 years old, calm, disciplined, a royal guard with a military past and a personal vow to never let emotion show on duty. But what most people didn't know? Edward used to play piano at his local church before enlisting. After his brother, also a soldier, died in combat, Edward joined the service, trading music for silence and grief for duty. Then came Marcus Grant, former U.S. wrestler, loud, proud, determined to go viral at any cost. Wearing a black shirt stamped "No Limits," he paced like a predator behind the crowd barrier. And when he locked eyes with Edward, the countdown to chaos had already begun. Before we show you the moment that turned a peaceful ceremony into a viral disaster, hit like, leave a comment, and subscribe to Guard Royals. We're on a mission to reach 1,000 subscribers, and your support makes it possible. And trust me, the ending of this story will stay with you long after the screen fades to black. It started like a joke, but the moment Marcus opened his mouth, everything changed. Standing just feet from the barrier, Marcus raised his voice. Not in admiration, but mockery. "Look at them, mannequins in red. You could toss a football at one and he wouldn't even flinch," he shouted, waving to the crowd. Laughter trickled in at first. Some tourists chuckled nervously, a few pulled out their phones, but others frowned. A father muttered, "That's not funny, that's sacred tradition." Marcus wasn't deterred. He thrived on provocation. He flexed his arms theatrically, rolled his neck with loud cracks, and stomped the ground like he was entering a ring. "All right, $10 says I make this guard blink." People began to murmur. "This is going too far," one woman whispered. "Someone stop him." But Marcus didn't stop. He needed this. The views, the attention. What no one knew, what Marcus himself tried to bury, was that only a year ago he had stood in front of a much smaller crowd at his father's funeral. A decorated Marine, quiet, stoic, just like Edward. And Marcus? He never said goodbye. Instead, he walked away, angry, unresolved. Now here he was, standing before a silent soldier once again. But instead of saluting, he was shouting. Maybe not at Edward, maybe at the ghost of the man he lost. Back at Buckingham, Edward stood still, stone-faced, professional. He'd been trained to withstand chaos, but even he could sense this wasn't just a tourist making trouble. This was something deeper, something dangerous. And it was only just beginning. And then it happened. The moment the world stopped watching for fun and started watching in horror. The energy in the square shifted. Marcus Grant had just shouted a challenge to the Royal Guard. Some laughed, most didn't. The tension hung heavy like a storm waiting to break, but no one expected him to take it that far. With zero warning, Marcus placed one foot on the iron barrier and swung the other over. Security gasped. The crowd screamed. "No, he's crossing the line," someone yelled. Within seconds, Marcus stood face to face with Edward Clarke. The Royal Guard didn't move. He didn't flinch. That was his duty. Marcus leaned in close, so close their faces nearly touched. "What are you made of, huh? Paint and pride?" Then, in a blur of motion, Marcus crouched low, wrapped his arms around Edward's waist, and lifted him clean off the ground. Tourists froze. Phones captured every second. Marcus twisted his body like a seasoned wrestler, grunting as he launched Edward up and slammed him backwards onto the cold stone. The impact was thunderous. Gasps turned into screams. Edward's bearskin hat rolled across the square like a fallen crown. His polished boots kicked slightly, then went still. Blood began to seep from the shoulder of his red uniform. A visible crack had spread in his left collarbone. One arm hung limp. People scrambled. Some ran for help, others stood paralyzed. "Marcus," he raised his arms like he just won a championship belt. "Now, that's how you wake up a statue," he bellowed. But no one clapped. No one cheered. In the chaos, an elderly woman standing near the railing dropped to her knees, sobbing. She wasn't just a tourist. She was Edward's mother, visiting in secret without his knowledge. She had come all the way from Yorkshire, proud to see her son stand guard for the first time in years. And now, she watched him lie motionless on stone. Her trembling hands reached through the bars. "Eddie," she whispered. "Oh God, please no." She wasn't the only one crying. A veteran in the crowd saluted Edward with tears in his eyes. "That man just assaulted the crown," he muttered, "and everything we stand for." Within moments, palace security rushed in. Medics pushed through. A young officer dropped to Edward's side, his voice clear and firm. "We've got you. Hold still. Help is here." Edward, dazed and barely conscious, whispered back through clenched teeth, "I didn't break form, did I?" The medic looked him in the eye. "You stood taller than anyone could have asked." As paramedics lifted Edward onto the stretcher, the crowd began to murmur, not in gossip, but in reverence. One man whispered, "He never fought back. He took it like a soldier." And that right there is what turned a viral prank into a national moment. Marcus was already being restrained by police. "It was a joke," he shouted. "I was just trying to entertain people." But no one was listening, and no one was laughing. One moment he was performing for laughs, the next he became the face of disgrace. The energy in the crowd had shifted entirely. No more chuckles, no more spectators holding up their phones like they were filming a show. People were crying. Others stood in complete silence, stunned by what they had just witnessed. Marcus Grant, who only minutes earlier had been basking in attention, was now standing awkwardly behind a wall of uniformed officers. His bravado started to peel away. His arms were no longer raised in triumph. His chest no longer puffed up in arrogance. His voice cracked when he spoke. "I didn't mean to hurt him. It was just a show. I didn't think..." But it was too late for explanations. The crowd wasn't buying it. A few tourists were still filming, not out of excitement, but to document what they believed was an assault on British tradition. Online, the video had already started spreading. Within 10 minutes, Twitter was flooded with hashtags like "Respect the Guard" and "Justice for Edward." One man, a veteran wearing a faded army cap, stepped forward and shouted through the crowd, "You're not a fighter. You're a coward. That man didn't flinch. You couldn't break him, so you tried to destroy him." Marcus lowered his eyes. For the first time, he looked small. One of the officers recognized Marcus, not from wrestling, but from a news article years ago. "You were in that car crash," he said quietly. Marcus nodded, swallowing hard. "I lost my brother," he muttered. "He was driving. We were heading to my first national match. I never wrestled again after that, until today." He wasn't just chasing attention. He was chasing redemption in all the wrong places. But pain doesn't excuse disrespect, and the people watching knew it. As the medics wheeled Edward Clarke toward the waiting ambulance, the injured guard did something unexpected. He lifted his good arm and gave a slight salute to the crowd, to his fellow officers, maybe even to his mother, still crying by the railing. The gesture was small, but it was enough to stir an entire square of onlookers into spontaneous applause. It wasn't for Marcus. It was for Edward, for his dignity, his discipline, and the quiet strength he never let go of. News outlets were already picking up the story. One reporter whispered into her mic, "We may have just witnessed a turning point, not just for this guard, but for how we view viral culture altogether." Marcus, now in handcuffs, was escorted out of the square. As he walked past the crowd, someone muttered, "You tried to make yourself famous by tearing someone else down. Now you're known for all the wrong reasons." And just like that, the guard who never moved had moved a nation. Sometimes, you don't have to speak a single word to change the world. Edward never said much, but the world heard him loud and clear. The next morning, the video had already reached 10 million views. News anchors across the United States and the United Kingdom led with the same headline: Royal Guard assaulted by American wrestler. Guard never moved, never fought back. It wasn't just news, it was a wake-up call. Social media erupted. Celebrities, veterans, politicians, people from every walk of life voiced their outrage. But more than anger, there was admiration. Because amid the chaos, Edward Clarke had done something powerful. He had remained still, and that stillness spoke louder than any viral punchline. Across the UK, public calls began circulating. Edward should be honored, recognized, respected. One user wrote, "Didn't fight back because he didn't need to. His silence was stronger than any slam." In a small flat outside of Leeds, a postal worker named Daniel Clarke, Edward's younger brother, watched the footage on repeat. They hadn't spoken in years. A falling out over family expectations had split them apart. But seeing Edward on that stretcher, still saluting, still holding dignity in the face of pain, something broke inside him. Daniel posted a simple message on Facebook. "I'm proud of you, Ed. Come home when you're ready. I'll be there." The post went viral, and suddenly this wasn't just a story about a guard and a wrestler. It was a story about healing, dignity, and family reconciliation. Meanwhile, Buckingham Palace issued a rare public statement. "We commend the steadfast conduct of Guardsman Clarke. His unwavering discipline reflects the highest standards of royal service." Within hours, Edward's hospital room filled with letters, some from school children, some from veterans, and one from the Queen herself. A letter written in elegant script read, "Your poise and professionalism embody the values we hold dear. We thank you not only for your service, but for reminding the world what true strength looks like." The hospital released a photo of Edward reading the letter, arm still in a sling, expression calm but proud. That image became iconic. Mugs, posters, and t-shirts printed with his silhouette standing tall beneath the words, "Strength, stillness." Back in the US, Marcus Grant had gone silent. His social media accounts were flooded with backlash. Brand deals dropped him, event organizers canceled appearances. No one wanted a part of him anymore. But even he couldn't look away from the fallout. In a short, somber statement recorded from police custody, he said, "I went to London thinking I could make a moment, but I had no idea the moment would make me look in the mirror." Whether sincere or not, the world was no longer interested in his apology. They had moved on to Edward. And Edward? He asked for privacy, no press tours, no interviews, just time to recover, and maybe play piano again, like he used to before the uniform. Because while Marcus chased the spotlight, Edward became the light. Heroes aren't born in battle, sometimes they're born in silence. It had been nearly 2 weeks since the incident. Edward Clarke remained in hospital under observation. The fracture in his collarbone was healing slowly. His left arm was still in a sling, but the physical pain wasn't what kept him awake at night. It was everything else. The interviews, the press outside the hospital, the letters, the public outpouring of support. He never asked for any of it. He had simply stood still. And yet, in doing so, Edward had become a symbol, a quiet representation of discipline in an undisciplined world. One afternoon, a military chaplain visited his room. They spoke only briefly, but at one point, the chaplain said, "Sometimes God chooses the quietest person to deliver the loudest message." Edward didn't respond right away, but later that evening he asked the nurse for his phone. He typed a single tweet, To the people sending me love and support, thank you. I was only doing my duty. The uniform teaches us to stand still, but you've reminded me why we stand in the first place. The tweet was shared over 2 million times in 48 hours. Back home, Edward sat alone in his flat one evening, watching old family videos on a dusty laptop. There, in grainy footage, he saw himself at age 12, playing piano beside his older brother in uniform, smiling and proud. The man he had modeled his life after. The man he had silently grieved. In that moment, for the first time in years, Edward let himself cry. Not because of pain, but because he realized something profound. He had become the kind of man his brother would have admired. And for Edward Clarke, that meant more than any medal or magazine cover ever could. Elsewhere, the British Ministry of Defence extended a formal invitation for Edward to return to duty, but this time in a new role, an official training mentor for new guards, focusing on psychological resilience and ceremonial discipline. It was rare, almost unheard of for someone still recovering from injury, but Edward had already proven that he understood something deeper than tactics. He understood composure under pressure, the power of restraint, and how to carry tradition without ever needing to shout about it. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, a new conversation had started, one about how modern men show strength. Schools and podcasts began referencing Edward's story. Talk show hosts debated what made someone truly strong in today's world. And slowly Edward's story shifted from the man who got slammed to something else entirely. The man who never needed to fight to prove his strength. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't raise his fist, but he raised a standard the world wasn't ready for. By the end of the month, Edward Clarke had become a household name, not for his physical strength, not for a viral outburst, but for something far rarer, restraint under humiliation. Across Britain and even in parts of the US, schools began using his story as a case study. In classrooms, teachers spoke of dignity. In churches, pastors referenced him in sermons. He had become an accidental moral compass in an age desperate for one. Edward wasn't interested in attention, though. He kept his circle small, his presence offline. The letters meant more to him than the headlines. One, in particular, arrived in a plain envelope with no return address. It simply read, "I was going to quit the force. I thought no one respected what we do anymore. But then I saw you stand. You reminded me who I used to be. Thank you." Edward didn't cry often, but that letter, it stayed tucked inside his Bible. His recovery progressed slowly but surely. One arm still lacked full strength, but his mind had never been sharper. He began mentoring new recruits privately, teaching not just posture and protocol, but purpose. He told them, "You're not standing for yourself. You're standing for every eye that sees you and wonders if there's anything in this world still sacred." On the first Sunday he returned to his hometown, Edward stepped inside the same church where he had once played piano. This time, he wasn't wearing a red uniform, just a plain navy suit. But when the choir finished their final hymn, the pastor turned to the congregation and said, "Before you go, I'd like to welcome someone who taught us all that real strength doesn't always speak." Edward was called to the front. The room, mostly elderly, many who'd watched his story on television, rose to their feet. Not with cheers, not with fanfare, just quiet, reverent applause, the kind that says, "We see you." After the service, an elderly man in a wheelchair approached Edward, a World War II veteran. He extended a shaky hand and said, "You made us proud, son, not because you fought, but because you didn't." Meanwhile, Marcus Grant faced his own reckoning. Sentenced to 10 months in British custody, he spent most of his time in reflection. His statement to the court had been short but sincere. "I came here to make a moment. I didn't realize I'd become a warning instead." His fame evaporated. But strangely, his silence brought him more peace than years of noise ever had. For the first time, he stopped chasing applause and started asking questions. Back in London, the square in front of Buckingham Palace looked the same, but those who had witnessed that day said something was different now. There was a deeper hush, more respect. Tourists still came with cameras, but now many lowered them as the guards passed, out of reverence, not rules. And Edward, he stood again. Not every day, not as often, but on ceremonial occasions he returned in full uniform. The man who had once been slammed to the ground now stood taller than ever. He didn't wave, he didn't speak, but the way he stood, firm, proud, still, told the world everything it needed to know. Sometimes the bravest thing a man can do is nothing at all. Sometimes real power isn't in the punch, it's in the pause. Let's pause the story for a moment and place you in that red coat. Let's imagine you're standing in front of one of the most iconic buildings in the world. Hundreds of eyes are on you, tourists, children, veterans, the world. And you've been trained not to move, not to speak, not even to blink if possible. Then someone steps over the barrier. You see him coming. He's big, loud. He's mocking you. You can smell the sweat from his body, the heat of confrontation in the air. Then, in an instant, he grabs you, lifts you, slams you. What would you do? Would you lash out? Would you break discipline? Would you shout, swing, curse, walk away? Or would you stay still? Because that's exactly what Edward Clarke did. He stayed still, even as the pain shot through his shoulder, even as his body hit the stone, even as blood trickled down his arm. He didn't move. He didn't give the aggressor what he wanted. He gave the world something else entirely, an example of calm strength. That moment says more than any outburst ever could. And maybe that's why this story resonated so deeply with so many of you watching right now, especially those of you who've lived through your share of trials. You know what it means to hold your ground, to take the hit, life, loss, injustice, and still rise with dignity. Because let's face it, we live in a time where everyone wants to react. Someone cuts us off in traffic, honk. Someone insults us online, type faster. Someone disagrees, we shout louder. But what if the strongest thing we can do is nothing at all? Edward Clarke's story isn't just about the military, or tradition, or even justice. It's about self-control. It's about how we choose to carry ourselves when no one would blame us for losing it. It's about understanding that our silence can speak, and that dignity is not weakness. So here's the challenge for us all. The next time someone insults you, the next time life throws you a curveball, the next time you're provoked beyond reason, ask yourself, what would standing still look like? And more importantly, who might be watching if you did? In the chaos of the internet, where trends rise and fall by the hour, Edward didn't chase noise. He became the still point in a spinning world. And sometimes that's what our communities, especially the younger generation, need most. Not more voices, but more examples. Now, we'd love to hear from you. On a scale of 1 to 10, how powerful did this story feel to you? Was it just another viral incident? Or was it a wake-up call, one that reminded us that values like discipline, respect, and honor still matter? Drop your number in the comments below, and more importantly, share why. To those of you in our senior community watching, many of whom know the value of quiet strength better than anyone, we'd love to hear. How would you have handled that moment? What's one time you chose dignity over retaliation? Your stories matter here. Before you go, if this story made you think, if it stirred something in your heart, please like this video to let us know. Comment below and join the conversation. And don't forget to subscribe to Guard Royals. We're building a community rooted in honor, tradition, and the stories that remind us of who we are. Our next goal is to reach 1,000 subscribers, and every single click helps us share these values even further. Because in a world full of noise, sometimes the stillest man in the square becomes the loudest voice of all.